The sonic history of education and architecture has been somewhat eclectic. Not quite sure where to start, but why don't we start with ancient Egypt? I look back and I can actually see young lads being taught hieroglyphics in the open air, where the sky is the perfect absorbing ceiling. I look at Greece, ancient Greece, and Pythagoras sitting there in a dimmed space, curtained off by his students, so that students can actually focus and on their work. I can hear oratory and poetry recited in the porticos of Rome. I can hear gymnastics in the palestras. The Tudors and the Stuarts taught in timber-clad spaces that were draped with tapestries and absorbed reverberation time that we've all heard about. Then we climb on to the 50s and the 60s. I should go back to Victorian England. Those spaces, I think, were touched on earlier. One hears the whipping of cane and birch in the background. The 50s, 60s brought modular architecture into education. Slimline structures. One can hear the rain dropping on the roof while pupils engaged on their projects. So where are we today? We've clearly inherited a lot of this fabric, and Mari's brought us good news in terms of 241 new schools that could be rebuilt. The new trends. We looked at open plan schools, and clearly, originally, there were benefits. They were economical to build. They offered flexibility, adaptability to a degree, but created absolute bedlam in the spaces in terms of optimum learning environments. I asked myself, and we've asked ourselves, why are architects so ocular-centric? We're taught that Vitruvius and Palladio, Corbusier, Ruskin celebrated sight as the most powerful of all of the senses. We're told that Aristotle identified sight as the noblest of all of the arts. I think one has to take stock. Vision is overrated. Vision is directional. Hearing is omnidirectional. It comes from all sides, three-dimensional. Sight isolates and sound incorporates. Eyes reach out and ears receive data, information. So, from the outset, we're taught as architects to sculpt mass, to create form. We create form and we create envelopes that contain space. And space comes in all sorts of sizes and shapes. There's liminal space, transitional space, inside-outside space, intimate space, private space, social spaces, public spaces. Now, children they actively engage in space more than any of us do. They love to be squeezed, pulled, tugged. They like to inhabit spaces under stairs. They like to create their own dens, tree houses. And remarkably, the space under the kitchen table becomes prime real estate. And it's in these spaces that inhabit signature sounds. All of these spaces have signature sounds of one type or another. Now, we'll move on to space. And we talked about ocular-centric architecture. Now I'd like to go to space and invisible architecture, ocular negative architecture. So what inhabits this wonderful kingdom? that we rarely visit, and where so many of our issues are, so many directions and clues to the way we could actually possibly create optimum learning environments. The major protagonist is sound. Sound, I'm not an acoustician, so forgive me, but I imagine it like an invisible ping pong ball that journeys through space, carrying information with it, and then decaying on adjacent surfaces. Within this space, there are other characters that dialogue with sound, and we'll come on to that. Their smells, there are all sorts of pheromones. All of these things impact on the way we learn and absorb information. And there's some really good data, evidence-based information that will support this. There's temperature. Even temperature affects the way and the quality sound moves through space. Pollen. There are all sorts of articles written every year during spring when we get grass and tree pollen. SAT examination results drop by 4-5%. Moisture, water vapor, that slows sound in space too and affects us. Asbestos, seldom talked about. Remarkably, no one talks about it. Some 80% of schools in this country, plus or minus, have asbestos in them. Blue, brown, and white asbestos. In the winter months, we have CO2, carbon dioxide. Windows are closed in classrooms. We're beginning to measure this for the first time in some of our pieces of research. The impact on CO2, and it's remarkable within a short period of time how you reach danger levels in these classrooms, oxygen levels, carbon monoxide in some of the more urban settings. There are pathogens, there's dust, there are all sorts of skin scales and follicles in the air, bugs, infections, and aerosols. All of these impact on learning. They're formaldehydes, tetracyclines, benzenes that are given off by simple paint, by varnishes, by fabrics, finishes, and so forth. I'd like to move on to really quickly onto the receptors, and again, rarely talked about. And the 7 ages of children, and there's a graph that shows the maturation of the senses, and that's so vital. We know that adolescents and youngsters actually hear sounds that we don't ever hear, very high-pitched sounds. And a lot of adolescents use their mobiles on a mosquito squeal. In fact, it's a very popular sound tone that none of us can actually hear. But colds, flus, sinusitis, waxing of the ears, grommets, and some of this was mentioned earlier, rubella, mumps, measles, all of these things affect the way a child actually hears, without getting into the more complicated realms of autism, where you actually have hyposensitivities to sound and the way it responds to you and creates fear and all sorts of other issues. I've got poor eyesight there. I was one of these youngsters at the age of 9, and I could barely see the blackboard at the head of the class, but I had to, and strangely enough, I just could not hear. I had some form of hear impairment, and I think some of you will emphasize. I see some nodding of heads there. But there are other wonderful things that happen. So I'll take you quickly into the invisible world that exists within a child. Pleasant and unpleasant sounds impact on body systems, your static system, motor system, autonomic system, the limbic system, which is the emotional core within you. Remarkably, cholesterol levels, your blood pressure, systolic rate, diastolic rate, respiration rate, heart rate, hormone release. Simplistically, good sounds make the body produce serotonin, feel-good drugs. Noxious sound, noises, will make the body produce noradrenaline, cortisols. get you into a fight and flight mode, not particularly good in a classroom setting. And all of these impact silently on the learning processes. So just to end this presentation, there's a wonderful dialogue that exists between the senses, and we must not forget that. It truly is wonderful. Colour can alter the perception of sound, as it can alter the perception of temperature by 4 to 6 degrees, remarkably, but even the sense of time. Last week, I actually spoke to a young musician, and she said that she saw colour every time she played certain pieces of music. And this is a type of synesthesia that is fairly common in one form or another. Sound can alter taste sensation. Heston Blumenthal and a rather eclectic sort of acoustic consultant called Condiment Junkie have discovered that you can actually move your sensations of taste with it on the tongue by playing different types of music. So, I'm going to just conclude. Amazingly, one can actually touch sound, and one can actually feel sound reverberate through one's body. But I'll leave you with this. A clear understanding of sound, the sonic environment, then all of the senses and all of the protagonists around it, plus all of the evidence-based research that supports all of this, will truly give us and provide us with the perfect learning environments. Thank you.